Matcave Gaming here, and we're out of the cave again. We're going to continue our talk about the Resident Evil franchise. Today we're going to talk about Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6. Now 4 is where the series took another turn. Not only did they bring the story in a new direction, but even the gameplay and the gameplay mechanics took a new turn. This time around, instead of the fixed cameras that we've been used to and the tank controls, now we're in a third-person shooter, kind of an over-the-shoulder third-person shooter mode. We reprise the role of Leon S. Kennedy from Resident Evil 2, definitely a fan favorite and certainly one of my favorite characters in the entire franchise. It's been some time now at this point. Umbrella, basically, from what we understand, has just kind of been shut down by the government. Raccoon City obviously is gone at this point, which we talked about during Code Veronica. And now Leon has been working as a special forces type agent, or maybe even Secret Service sort of deal for the President of the United States. This time, though, the President's daughter was kidnapped by some sort of cult group. And Leon is sent to go and save Ashley Graham, the President's daughter. Now, this game changed the way we looked at the Resident Evil series, because now we weren't dealing with traditional zombies and monsters. I mean, there were definitely monsters and mutations and things like that in the game, but the enemies that would have normally been zombies are now these mind-controlled people that have this parasite in them, and there is their leader, Sadler, who's controlling them. He has mind control over them, sort of a hive mind sort of situation. And as you go through the game, you start to learn more and more about this cult and where they got the parasite from. There was even a new character in the game named Lewis. He was undercover and an operative to try to figure out what was going on and gain a sample of it. But during the mix, the cult kidnapped the President's daughter. Their intentions were to infect her with the parasite and then send her back home, with now this mind control happening. So this was, we're outside of the U.S. I believe this took place somewhere in Europe. I think it was somewhere, maybe somewhere in Spain. I'm not sure. They were speaking Spanish throughout the game, and but it certainly was overseas from the U.S. where the original series was taking place. So Leon is on his mission to save the President's daughter, and with the gameplay change, it's no longer fixed cameras and us searching a room and figuring out where to go that way. This was now a 3D environment that was not free roaming. It wasn't open world, but there was a lot of space to explore. The map was huge this time around, and we had to kind of retrain ourselves as fans of how to play this series. Certain things still remain, though. You're looking for keys, you're looking for med kits, you're looking for items to help you along your way. Again, you get an inventory system. It wasn't as limited as the prior entries were, though. You had a lot more space, and you could even increase that space as you went, depending on how much in-game money you gained. There was a merchant in the game. It was definitely a fan favorite. This guy would come out of nowhere, kind of a masked character, and ask you what you're selling, what you'd like to buy, and he had all your stuff there. So he would increase your inventory slots if needed, if you had enough money to do so. So you work your way through the game, and the biggest difference was we're not battling Umbrella anymore. We're not battling traditional zombies. We're dealing with this cult and trying to find our way through. You eventually locate the President's daughter, and the game switches gears a little bit, rather reminiscent of Resident Evil 2, when you played as Claire and you had Sherry with you and you had to protect her. Same idea. Now you have Ashley with you, and the cult members are trying to capture her again. And if they capture her and you don't get to her and save her in time, it counts as a death. It's game over at that point. Same idea as, saving. You find the typewriters, you save. There's a lot of them throughout the game, so you get plenty of opportunities to save. No ink ribbons. this time around, you just walk up to the typewriter and you save the game. There's no item to collect to actually save your game, which was nice. It saved inventory space. But personally, I felt that took away some of the edge. One of the stresses that you would have while playing the original games was whether or not you had enough ink ribbons to save your game, because if you don't save your game often and you die, you're going back to whatever your last save was, and you could end up having to replay quite a bit of the game. So it took some of the pressure off, but in all honesty, it didn't ruin the game at all. When it came to Resident Evil 4, this entry in the franchise not only became a major fan favorite, but this was also an entry that brought new fans to the series. A lot of people got their start with Resident Evil Part 4, and then eventually, went back and played the older ones. So it's interesting to see the experiences and hear the experiences from people of how they got to experience this franchise. People starting with 4 and then playing the sequels after that were pretty comfortable because they played so much like other games that were out at the time and then came out even in the future, because that was kind of the style that lasted for a long time and still lasts today. So for people to start that way and go back to the fixed cameras, the tank controls, they found it difficult. They found it kind of archaic a little bit, the controls. Personally, I have no problem with the tank controls. In fact, I kind of prefer them. I guess it's just because I started out that way and grew up with that. So maybe because I was so used to it and played that way for so many entries, I'm just more comfortable playing that way. Resident Evil 4 was definitely groundbreaking. It came out originally on the GameCube, and then eventually was ported to the PS2, and as recently was remastered in HD. I just most recently played it again on the PlayStation 4 in high definition. They revamped it, and the graphics look wonderful. The controls stayed the same, single analog stick for even moving and turning. The right analog stick was kind of just camera tilts, but it wasn't full analog control that we're used to with many games. So taking control of a character that we all knew, playing as Leon, was great, and continuing his story to see what he did after Resident Evil 2. As you get a little ways into the game, a major reveal happens, and it happens kind of quick, and it's questionable at the start, but any fans of Resident Evil 2 knew exactly what we just saw. We find out that Ada Wong from Part 2, who we saw die, actually survived. And she's there helping Leon in the background. One of the coolest things about this game was when you finish the main story, there's another storyline where you play as Ada. And it's fantastic. After you've played the main story and you're so familiar with everything from Leon's point of view, now you're kind of on the outskirts, and occasionally she's watching over Leon as you play her story. It was a wonderful bonus mission. It's a decent story. It's not as long as the main game, but it's not too short either. It's a nice full campaign that you get to play with Ada, and finding out that she survived, and not only that, she's working for Wesker from Part 1. And then we found out that he survived and became mutated with the T-virus in Code Veronica. So now these two are teamed up, though Ada's always got her own agenda. She's not one, even though she's technically a good guy, I guess? I don't know. She's on her own side. There's no good and bad with her. She's whatever is going to get what she wants, that's the side she's on. So even though it looks like she works for Wesker, Wesker doesn't have any control over her. Ada does whatever she wants. So we eventually get through the game. You rescue the president's daughter. Ada ends up taking the sample of the parasite away from you because Wesker wants it for the next project that he's working on. You find out he's not part of Umbrella. He's part of some other company. Even playing it a couple times, I don't even remember them mentioning the name of that company that he works for. But Wesker's on his own, kind of doing his own thing, and really picking up the research, I guess, where Umbrella left off. So it ends up being a happy ending. You save the president's daughter, though you didn't retrieve the sample. Ada got it and from what we understand, brings it to Wesker. That leads us into Resident Evil 5. Now, just like 4 bringing us back to a familiar character, 5 brings us back to Chris Redfield, the hero from the first game, and we saw him again in Code Veronica. We're taking full control of Chris Redfield. This time it takes place in Africa. Very similar to 4 with the enemies. It's not traditional zombies. Again, it's some sort of parasite being used. So the assumption here is that Wesker used this parasite from 4 and used it on these people, and they're in somewhat of control. They're the enemies that you're going after, and they mutate and everything as you go throughout the game. This one plays just like 4 did, an over-the-shoulder third-person shooter. A little bit more of a limited inventory system this time around. You can't really expand it, though there's a lot of weapons to unlock throughout the game. Multiple playthroughs, you can work your way to infinite ammo and unlock all kinds of bonus features in this game. Part 5, you find out when you pick up from Chris, there's a little bit of a backstory that you don't see. You can actually play the backstory in the bonus game, but you find out that Jill is gone. And it looks like, from what we see from Chris's memories, Jill is dead. We see him even at a tombstone with her name on it. So his partner for all that time with Stars is dead. Chris is now on his own, and he's working with the BSAA, and they're working against bioterrorism. He comes to Africa to investigate what's going on with all these people with this parasite, and gets a new partner named Sheva. She's playable in multiplayer. This was a big change to the series, is being able to play with somebody. You could play local co-op in split screen, or you could play online, and that was the best way. Me personally, I thought it was great playing online because you got your full screen, each person, and you work together to get through this game. Voice chat on the console and everything, so you can communicate with each other, but even the characters themselves have these little moments where they can talk to each other and interact, and you kind of build a relationship between the two. The stronger the relationship, the more they're kind of willing to protect each other and help, which was a nice little system to it. Gameplay-wise, pretty much played the same way as 4. And now you're trying to investigate what happened here, very similar to 4, find out what is this parasite, what's going on, why is this place getting infected, and why are all these bioterrorism outbreaks happening. You end up finding out that Wesker is behind this, and he's trying to create this, what he called the Ouroboros virus, and he wants to basically put it into a rocket and explode it over whatever part of the world and just infect all over the place. So it just, classic villain, like, I'm going to kill everything and somehow I'll survive this. So, we got to go kind of James Bond style here and go after him. Graphic-wise, a huge improvement. I originally played the game on PlayStation 3. They eventually remastered that as well, just like 4. On the PlayStation 4, looks fantastic. Plays in 60 frames per second. Wonderful revamp to the game. I played through it again and started to unlock things and get infinite ammo and unlock all the different weapons. You can upgrade them as you go to make them more powerful. And with so many weapons available, you can play any way you want. That game is a blast just to replay, because there's still more and more to do. And then as you unlock everything, you get the bonus stories and side stories. So that game overall is a lot of fun. What you end up finding out during the game is that Jill didn't die. Jill is actually infected in a way and being controlled by Wesker. She has this this jewel-looking thing attached to her chest. And it's interesting, with the Resident Evil movies that came out, they tried to incorporate that with Jill's character, and you actually see the same thing implanted on her chest, making her a bad guy. So she's coming out, and she's pretty much a villain at this point that you have to fight. You eventually get this showdown with you and Sheva versus Wesker and Jill. Wesker eventually moves on and leaves Jill to kind of finish the work. And if you're successful in this part of the game, you can actually get that jewel ripped off of her and get Jill back. She doesn't join you for the rest of the campaign. She goes off to finish off her side of the story, and there is a bonus mission where you get to play with Jill and another character as well. but you do get to save Jill and find out that she was alive that whole time, which was nice. It was a very sad moment to start that game, to realize such a beloved character from the original game is now dead. But when you start to uncover what actually happened, it's a great reveal, and it's a lot of fun to play through that game. Part 6, Resident Evil 6, when it was announced, was a huge release. But by now, with the change from that Resident Evil 4 did, and then Resident Evil 5, especially 5, became very action-oriented. This no longer felt like survival horror, which is what the franchise was originally. Now it became a lot of action. Don't get me wrong, there were still plenty of moments and jump scares and things like that, but even the aspects of solving puzzles weren't as often, and when they were there, weren't that difficult. It wasn't like the original entries where you had to really think and try to backtrack a little bit sometimes just to figure out what's going on, read some files. Don't get me wrong, there are files still to read and it adds some more backstory, but it just wasn't that original Resident Evil feel, that you didn't feel that terror as you played 4 and 5. So when 6 was coming out, that was a huge concern with a lot of fans. And even after 6's release, there's mixed reviews about this game. And even myself, I'm kind of on the fence with the game. My original playthrough of it, I was not happy with the game, and for a major reason. It wasn't because of the story, and it wasn't because of the characters. It was because the camera was a nightmare. The camera was so close to your character, and your character wanted to move quickly through a lot of areas. The problem was, you couldn't see what was right in front of them, so you'd get stopped on something, you didn't even know what it was, so suddenly you're trying to run, and you come to a complete stop all of a sudden because you hit a box that you didn't see. It made playing the game a chore. And that's something that you don't want from a game. You don't want the game to be frustrating because of something that's out of your control that made it too difficult. After its release, there was an update to the game. And in part of this update, clearly the developers listened to fan feedback and they fixed the camera. And they didn't just put it in another spot, they let you pull back the camera as far as you wanted. To a point, obviously you couldn't go ridiculous, but there was a slide meter to change. I pulled it all the way back and it looked like Resident Evil 4 at that point, from that view, which made the gameplay experience completely different. That time around, I loved playing the game. It was like playing a completely different game. That's how dramatic the change was just by pulling the camera back. So let's talk about 6 and why it's got mixed reviews and why it sort of brought the game back to survival horror in a way, but also didn't. There's multiple campaigns in this game. One campaign you play as Leon, again, from Resident Evil 4 and 2. His story is the survival horror story. We're back to zombies. Basically a breakout of a similar strand to the T virus or the G virus happens on a college campus. And even the president is there for some sort of convention thing, and he gets infected and dies. But it's zombies this time, and they're creepy, and the graphics are so good in this game, and the way you attack the zombies and they fall apart, the battle damage on them, and it's just, they're terrifying to look at. I mean, this brought it back to scares, and there's jump scares, and there's puzzles, there's keys to find. And that felt, even though it was still a third-person shooter, which now, actually something that's worth mentioning, in 6, you can run and shoot. You can walk and shoot, you can run and shoot. The rest of the series, you had to stop, aim, and shoot. This one let you run and gun. That was a huge difference also. But Leon's campaign was clearly the survival horror campaign, and it is by far my favorite one in this game. The next campaign is with Chris Redfield. This one feels just like you're playing Resident Evil 5, and in the sense that it's action-oriented. It's military. He's with the BSAA. He's got soldiers with him. He's leading a team through like the streets. You're even like up on a tank at a point. This is military action, and you're the special forces side of it, which is not a bad thing. For all the fans that loved 5 so much for that action, this was the campaign that they loved the most. The third campaign was following a new character that you take control of and you learn his story, but he's with Sherry Birkin. Now, Sherry was from part 2. She was the little girl. She was William Birkin's daughter that Claire protected in her storyline. She's now grown up, and she's also working for the government to fight against bioterrorism. Her campaign, along with the new character that you play as, feels like playing Resident Evil 3, Nemesis. Because in this campaign, you're constantly being hunted by a large, mutated creature, very similar to Nemesis. This thing was crazy too. As it comes after you, he's got this like mechanical arm that looks like he can change out and make different attachments to it. So he's pretty brutal when you have to try to fight him. But you have this constant fear of being chased, of being hunted, and to bring it back to that feeling that we hadn't had since Resident Evil 3. It was a nice. It was so nostalgic feeling. And I think that was one of the things that I loved the most about playing that campaign, is that it felt like playing Resident Evil 3, which was definitely one of the funnest ones to play in the franchise. Then there's a storyline following Ada. She's back again. Ada is this one that you can't really seem to get rid of her. She's always around and has her objective. And her storyline is the one that has the most twists and turns to it. This one, as you play throughout 6, the story's all intertwined. They span a couple of years, so when you're playing, you're kind of back and forth through the timeline, and it can get a little confusing here and there, but by the end of the game, when you play all of them, you can kind of piece together the chronological order of it, and then if you do like select stages, you could actually go and manually play the game in chronological order, which was a lot of fun. I did that on a second playthrough, second, third playthrough, and it puts the story together in a nice kind of seamless line. And when you play that way, you're bouncing back and forth from each character, so that made it a lot of fun too. You weren't the same character for the entire stretch. You're just back and forth and playing all the characters throughout the campaign. This game's release, like I said, had mixed reviews. There's a lot of people who just flat out hate Part 6, but maybe it's because they never played it after that software update that pulled the camera back. Because when I first played this game, I was so disappointed, and I had very little fun with it. I saw the potential in the game, and I was so disappointed. But the next playthroughs after that update, it was a completely different experience. And to be honest, if you only experienced it, the release version, please, if you are a Resident Evil fan, go back and play Resident Evil 6. Make sure it's up to date, pull that camera back, and I promise you, it's a completely different experience, and you'll end up loving the game. Those 3 games are really, they brought the series in a whole new direction. The story in 6 especially is a little complicated. It's kind of all over the place, which is another reason a lot of people aren't a huge fan of it, but I still consider it very much worth playing. After 6, really, we had some time, and it wasn't until the most recent Resident Evil 7 that we got a new entry in this franchise. They had some of the CG animated movies that are linked directly to the game, but as far as an actual game and playing through a story, we had to wait till Resident Evil 7, which was a huge release, and that'll be the next one we talk about when we come back on Matcave Gaming. We'll be out of the cave for that again, and we'll talk about Resident Evil 7 and how it reimagined the franchise. Thanks for joining. Please subscribe, hit that like button. I'll see you next time on Matcave Gaming.